The night after my mother's funeral, the world felt like it had lost its rhythm. The house in suburban Chicago, once alive with the hum of her voice, the smell of her cooking, the sound of her laughter drifting down the hallway, now pulsed with silence. I sat across from my father, Robert Bennett, at the dining table where the weight of absence pressed harder than any words could. His broad shoulders sagged, his eyes fixed on the untouched cup of coffee cooling between his hands. Mom, Laura, had been the center of everything. She was the kind of woman who held our family together with warmth that felt both ordinary and irreplaceable. Her absence left me, Madison, 21 and unprepared, adrift in a house that no longer felt like home. Dad's grief was heavy, but beneath it I sensed something else, something I couldn't yet name. His silence was not only sorrow, it was guarded, secretive. I had seen it before, flickering in moments when my aunt, Melissa, Mom's younger sister, stood too close. At the funeral, his gaze lingered on her longer than grief demanded. I had tried to ignore it, convincing myself that I was reading into shadows. That pain makes people act strangely. But as the minutes stretched, as the night deepened, I couldn't shake the unease pressing against my chest. The thought lodged itself like a thorn. Was there something between them? I wanted to swallow it, bury it under layers of exhaustion and mourning. Instead, the words slipped out barely more than a whisper. Dad, do you love Aunt Melissa? The sound seemed to fracture the silence. His hand tightened around the mug, his eyes darting up to meet mine. Wide, startled, not with outrage but recognition. For a breathless second, I saw the truth in his hesitation, and it terrified me. He didn't answer. He didn't have to. The silence was its own confession. In that moment, grief transformed into something sharper, heavier. I had stepped into a reality I wasn't ready for, one where my father's sorrow wasn't as pure as I wanted to believe. The man I had looked to for stability now carried a secret capable of destroying what little we had left. I leaned back in my chair, my pulse roaring in my ears. Nothing was said, yet everything had changed. And though I longed to rewind, to take the words back, I knew there was no unhearing the silence that followed. Grief has a way of magnifying silence. After that night, my father and I moved through the house like strangers. The whisper I had released into the world, "Do you love Aunt Melissa?" hung between us, unspoken yet impossible to ignore. He never acknowledged it, but the weight of his pause lived in every glance, every unfinished word. I tried to remember my mother as she was, Laura Bennett, steady as the morning sun. She filled spaces with warmth, a woman who seemed to understand people better than they understood themselves. But even her strength had limits, and I wondered now if she had carried a suspicion she never spoke aloud. My father, Robert, once seemed like the anchor of our family. Reliable, predictable, a man whose silence I thought was safety. Now that same silence terrified me. It wasn't emptiness, it was concealment. I replayed his stillness at the table, the way his knuckles whitened around the mug, and each time the image grew darker. And then there was Melissa, my aunt. She had always been a puzzle, a mix of laughter and danger. She wore bold colors, told stories with wild hand gestures, and carried a magnetism that drew people toward her. Growing up, I admired her, until I noticed how Mom's smile would stiffen whenever Melissa stayed too long. At the time, I dismissed it as sibling rivalry. Now, I wasn't so sure. In the days after the funeral, Melissa visited often. She said it was to help us adjust, to fill the void Mom left. But her presence unsettled me. I caught Dad watching her when he thought I wasn't looking, a glance too tender to be harmless. Once, when I entered the kitchen, their conversation stopped abruptly, like a flame snuffed out. I wanted to confront him again, but fear kept me quiet. What if my whisper had already cracked something irreparable? What if pressing harder made the fracture split wide open? At night, I lay awake in my childhood room, memories clashing with suspicions. I remembered birthdays with all of us gathered around the table, Mom's hand resting lightly on Dad's arm. I remembered Melissa laughing too loudly at Dad's dry jokes. The past twisted itself into new shapes under the shadow of what I thought I knew. The conflict wasn't just between Dad and me. It was inside me, Could I accept silence as denial, or did the truth demand to be spoken again? One evening, as Melissa lingered in the doorway, her perfume trailing behind her, Dad caught my eye. His expression was unreadable, but his gaze held a plea. Don't ask again. That was when I realized the secret wasn't waiting to be uncovered. It had already begun to define us. Days turned into weeks, but the question I had whispered still pulsed between us like a hidden fault line. My father carried on with his routines, mowing the lawn, balancing bills, preparing quiet dinners, yet every ordinary gesture felt strained, as if each movement was rehearsed to avoid what lingered beneath. Melissa's visits became more frequent. She arrived with casseroles and cheerful chatter, her laughter ricocheting through the halls that had once echoed with Mom's voice. To an outsider, she was the dutiful sister stepping in to help. But to me, her presence was like a shadow stretching across everything my mother left behind. I noticed the smallest things. Dad leaning closer than necessary when she handed him a dish, the way her hand lingered on his shoulder just a second too long. Each exchange felt like a secret they didn't dare speak aloud, and I couldn't decide which was worse, imagining it or believing it was real. Inside, my emotions tangled into knots. I grieved for my mother, but I also felt betrayed, protective, and unbearably curious. What if she had known? What if she had died carrying a truth I had only stumbled upon by accident? One evening, I walked into the living room to find Melissa curled on the couch, sipping wine while Dad sat nearby, his posture unusually relaxed. Their conversation stopped the instant I appeared. Melissa smiled brightly, too brightly, and Dad rose quickly, as though caught in something he couldn't explain. I wanted to scream, to demand answers, but my voice refused to obey. Instead, I retreated upstairs. The image burned into my mind. In my room, I stared at the family photograph on my dresser, Mom in the middle, her arms wrapped around both of us. Now the frame felt like a lie. I began avoiding Melissa, slipping away whenever she arrived, though her perfume still clung to the air long after she left. Dad noticed my distance but said nothing. Perhaps he believed silence would protect us. Perhaps he underestimated how much silence can destroy. One night, unable to bear the tension, I confronted him again. My voice shook, but my words were steady. Dad, you can't keep pretending. Do you love her? His eyes flashed with something raw, anger, guilt, maybe even relief. But before he could answer, the sound of Melissa's car pulling into the driveway cut through the room. He looked at the door, then back at me, torn. In that moment, I realized the truth wasn't hidden anymore. It was arriving step by step, with Melissa's heels clicking across the porch. And whether he admitted it or not, the confrontation I feared was no longer a choice. It was inevitable. Melissa stepped inside that night, her heels clicking softly against the hardwood floor, her smile practiced but fragile. I watched my father stiffen, his body torn between guarding me and gravitating toward her. The air thickened, the kind of silence that trembles just before breaking. "Madison," Melissa greeted, her voice warm, though her eyes flickered with unease. "I thought I'd stop by, see how you two were holding up." My father didn't answer. His gaze was locked on me, waiting for me to either retreat or explode. For weeks I had swallowed suspicion. But now, with both of them standing in front of me, the words clawed their way out. "Were you in love with her while Mom was still alive?" The question rang out louder than I intended, sharp enough to slice through the fragile pretense we'd been living in. Melissa's smile faltered, and Dad's shoulders dropped, as though I had finally spoken the truth he had been unable to bear. "Madison, please," he began, but the plea in his tone was confirmation enough. Tears stung my eyes, but anger burned hotter. "She trusted you, Dad. She trusted both of you. Was everything a lie?" Melissa stepped forward, her hand half raised, her voice trembling. "It wasn't like that." "I never meant for—" "Don't," I snapped. The room blurred with betrayal. "You let her die without telling her. You let me believe we were a family." My father's face crumpled. He set his hand against the table as if it were the only thing keeping him upright. "I loved your mother," he whispered, the words raw. But somewhere along the way, I loved Melissa too. The confession shattered something in me. Love, so sacred, so entwined with loyalty, was suddenly fractured, messy, tainted. My chest tightened with the realization that grief had not just stolen my mother. It had revealed a secret that threatened to destroy the pieces left behind. Melissa's eyes shone with unshed tears. "Laura knew," she said softly. The words were barely audible, but they detonated inside me. I stared at her, stunned. "She knew?" "She never said it outright," Melissa continued, her voice breaking. "But she sensed it. She looked at me once and said, 'Don't take from me what I can't get back.' I swore I wouldn't. And I never," she faltered, shaking her head. "But your father and I, we carried it, even in silence." The room felt unbearably small, as though the walls themselves recoiled from the truth. I looked at my father, at the man who had taught me honesty, stability, trust. Now all I saw was contradiction. For the first time, I realized the truth was not just about them, it was about me, about the way this revelation would shape who I became, how I loved, and what I chose to believe about loyalty. And though my voice trembled, I said the only words that matched the weight of the moment. "You broke her heart long before she was gone. And now you've broken mine too." The house was never the same after that night. The truth, once spoken, refused to retreat into silence. It lived in every corner, humming beneath the walls like a current that could never be shut off. Dad tried to reach me in small ways, placing a cup of coffee by my elbow in the mornings, asking about my classes, standing too long at my bedroom door before finally walking away. But none of it erased the words he had confessed. Love, once a steady foundation, had turned fragile and fractured in my eyes. Melissa stopped visiting as often. When she did, the air between us was stiff, her once effortless laughter replaced by careful pauses. I could see guilt etched into her every gesture, but apology felt meaningless. What good were apologies when the wound came from betrayal that could never be undone? I avoided both of them, yet their choices remained inescapable. Every family photograph, every memory, now carried a shadow. My mother's face in the pictures seemed to watch me, her smile bittersweet, as though she had known more than she ever said. In time, I realized the story wasn't only about what they had done. It was about what I would do with it. Would I let their secret harden me into someone who no longer trusted love? Or could I carry the truth without letting it define me? One evening, as autumn leaves scattered across the yard, I sat with Dad on the porch. We didn't talk about Melissa, or Mom, or the fractures between us. We just sat in silence, listening to the wind move through the trees. And in that quiet, I understood something. Love is not simple. It is flawed, messy, sometimes cruel. Yet it is also the thread that binds us, even when the fabric is torn. I wasn't ready to forgive him. I wasn't ready to forgive Melissa. But I also wasn't ready to let bitterness be the only inheritance my mother left me. So I chose a different kind of silence. Not the silence that hides truth, but the silence that allows healing to begin. When I finally stood to go inside, I whispered into the night, more to myself than to him. "I'll carry her memory, not your mistakes." He closed his eyes, as if those words struck deeper than any accusation ever could. And though nothing about our family was whole anymore, I knew my story wasn't ending here. It was only just beginning.